Ernetti placed the room in near darkness. Not theatrical darkness. Not the darkness of a stage before the curtain rises. More like a laboratory after hours, when the windows have gone black, the instruments hum softly, and the faces of the men inside are lit from below by a screen they do not fully trust. The machine in front of them was not supposed to be a time machine in the old sense. No chair, no lever, no capsule of polished metal waiting to throw a passenger backward through the centuries. It was stranger than that. A receiver, a screen, a set of antennae said to be built from rare or unusual metals, a direction-finding system that could be pointed not toward a radio station or a city on a military map, but toward a date, toward a dead afternoon in first-century Jerusalem. The men around the device were not supposed to be mystics. Ernetti described priests, scientists, and engineers, men comfortable around circuits and waveforms, and perhaps uneasy enough with machines to fear what one might reveal. At the center stood Father Pellegrino Ernetti, a Benedictine monk and scholar of ancient music, a man who spent his life with chants, manuscripts, liturgical fragments, and voices that had survived long after the mouths that first shaped them were gone. On this night, at least as Ernetti later told it, the machine was aimed at Calvary. The screen flickered. No camera crew waited on the hill. No hidden microphone sat among the crowd. No historian stood near the cross with a notebook, trying to catch the details before grief and politics turned them into doctrine. Only the machine. If Ernetti was telling the truth, it could pull old light and lost sound out of the universe, like a broadcast that had never fully died. Slowly, the image formed. A face, a wounded body, a scene that, for Christians, was never merely an event in the past, but the hinge on which the world itself had turned. Ernetti would claim the Chronovisor had shown him the crucifixion of Jesus Christ. If that were true, the implications would be almost impossible to contain. No relic in a glass case could compare with it. No painted icon darkened by candles. No manuscript copied by monks. No sermon carried forward by faith. The Chronovisor promised a picture, a machine-made window onto the most contested, sacred moment in Western history. A device like that would not stay safely inside religion. It would move into law, politics, war, family memory, guilt, power, and every carefully protected lie. A government could not hide a massacre if the dead afternoon could be tuned back in. A church could not bury a scandal if the closed room could be watched again. A family could not keep repeating the gentle version of a death if the past itself could be made to testify. Then, almost as soon as the machine becomes imaginable, it vanishes. A device that could see yesterday would not merely answer questions. It would tear open the world built around the questions no one could answer.
I'm Tom Mackenzie. You're listening to Unexplained History. Tonight, we're looking at one of the strangest Vatican-adjacent claims of the 20th century. A priest who said he helped build a machine that could photograph the past. He said it showed him lost speeches, vanished plays, moments from ancient Rome, and the death of Christ. I know how that sounds. Pure science fiction. And maybe it is. But the Chronovisor does not behave like a tidy hoax. It keeps picking up details that make you pause. Famous names, missing records, a published photograph, and one very uncomfortable possibility. If the machine never existed, why were so many people ready for it?
Most accounts begin with the machine. A darker route begins with sound. Father Pellegrino Ernetti was born in 1925 and became a Benedictine monk. His known work was not in physics or engineering. It was in ancient music, liturgy, and the study of old chant, the kind of music that can make a stone chapel feel occupied by people who have been dead for centuries. The detail changes the color of everything that follows. Ernetti did not step forward as a carnival inventor, waving blueprints for a time machine. He came from a world built around preservation. Monasteries copied texts by hand. Churches guarded ritual across generations. Chant carried memory through breath, repetition, discipline, and rooms designed to make a human voice linger. For a monk steeped in that atmosphere, the past was not dead in any simple way. It survived in phrases, melodies, margins, and ceremonies. It could be repeated. It could be reconstructed. It could be heard again, even if only imperfectly. Then, the 20th century arrived, with its own kind of resurrection. Radio pulled voices out of the air. Television made distance collapse into a glowing rectangle. Tape recorders trapped performances on reels. Oscilloscopes turned vibration into visible shape. Machines began doing, in metal and glass, what memory had once done in ritual. For someone like Ernetti, ancient music and modern electronics could sit closer together than they first appear. One discipline asked how to recover what people once sang. The other asked how invisible signals could be caught, amplified, and made to speak. The Chronovisor grows in the charged space between monastery and laboratory. Ernetti begins, supposedly, with a dangerous question: do sounds ever truly vanish? Perhaps a voice does not disappear completely when the mouth closes. Perhaps light and sound leave traces, scattered but still present. Perhaps history is not destroyed, only dispersed. Physics does not give that longing much room, but the feeling is easy to understand. Anyone who has stood in an old house after a funeral knows the sensation. A room can seem to hold the event that happened there. A scratchy recording can bring a dead singer suddenly close. A photograph can make one fraction of a second feel more durable than the life around it. The Chronovisor gives that private sensation switches, antennae, and a screen. Maybe the past was less like memory and more like a signal. If so, perhaps the right receiver, in the right hands, could tune it in. Ernetti would eventually describe a device that did not transport a person into the past, but received the past. Antennae gathered light and sound waves. A direction finder selected the historical target. A screen displayed the recovered image. A recorder preserved what the machine saw. The description is slippery. It sounds technical enough to be tempting, but not technical enough to be tested. It borrows the vocabulary of the age: wavelengths, receivers, antennae, screens, recordings. A religious miracle, dressed in the clothes of electronics. Ernetti was not claiming a private vision in prayer. He was claiming that the crucifixion had been caught by a machine.
I keep coming back to the same detail. What gets me is the framing. Ernetti does not sell this as a ghost story. He sells it like a technology story from an age when machines were becoming the new witnesses. A camera saw it, so it happened. A recorder captured it, so you could play it back. A screen showed it, so maybe the argument was over. The old dream turns bluntly modern. Put sacred history on video, and maybe doubt finally shuts up.
a machine that ambitious needs important men standing near it. Ernetti reached for authority in the bluntest way possible: famous men. Ernetti later claimed the project involved 12 scientists. Most remained unnamed. 2 names were large enough to make the claim harder to brush aside: Enrico Fermi, Werner von Braun. Fermi was one of the defining physicists of the 20th century, a Nobel Prize winner whose work helped shape the nuclear age. His name carries the smell of chalkboards, reactor piles, wartime secrecy, equations, and the moment when theoretical physics became world-altering power. Von Braun brought a different charge. He was a rocket engineer, a central figure in Nazi Germany's V2 program, and later, one of the architects of the American space program. His life already belonged to the morally tangled machinery of the century: war, ambition, reinvention, propaganda, rockets, and the race to the moon. Place those 2 men beside a Benedictine priest and a screen that can see the past, and the air in the room changes. A lone monk claiming a time-viewing screen might be dismissed as one man's fantasy. A monk claiming he built it with Fermi and von Braun begins to sound like a Cold War secret, the sort of thing filed under a classification stamp and denied for 50 years. In the fuller accounts, the team works quietly. The device is completed around the 1950s. They test it on scenes from history. Cicero speaks in the Roman Senate. Napoleon appears. Mussolini appears. Moments that should have been swallowed by time come back with voices and faces attached. The alleged viewings escalate with the rhythm of a dare. First, classical history, then modern history, then lost culture, then scripture. The Last Supper, the Crucifixion. By then, the machine is not a tool for settling a small scholarly dispute. It is the most dangerous archive ever imagined. But famous names bring a problem with them. The larger the name, the larger the shadow it leaves in the record. Fermi was not an invisible hobbyist. Von Braun was not a forgotten technician who could drift through history without paperwork. These were men tied to institutions, schedules, laboratories, governments, biographies, interviews, security files, and public lives. If they spent meaningful time helping the priest build a device that could observe the past, some ordinary trace should be visible somewhere. A letter, a lab note, a diary entry, a technical diagram that survives serious inspection, a colleague who mentions the work without sounding like he is repeating a legend, a scrap of hardware with a chain of custody. Instead, we get the claim, and then a silence asked to carry far too much weight. The names make the myth larger. They also make the empty space around the myth harder to ignore.
Here's where I get stuck. If you want to believe the Chronovisor, the famous names help. Fermi and von Braun make the whole thing feel less like a chapel rumor and more like something that could have lived in the weird overlap between post-war science, military secrecy, and the Vatican. But if you're trying to check the claim, those same names become a problem. Men like that leave trails. Not perfect trails, obviously, but trails. When a claim puts them in the room and the paperwork never follows, I start wondering whether their names are evidence or camouflage.
For years, the Chronovisor moved quietly through conversations, private claims, and later retellings. Then, in 1972, it entered print. The Italian weekly La Domenica del Corriere, the kind of illustrated Sunday magazine sold on newsstands and folded beside coffee cups, published an article commonly cited under the title Inventata la macchina che fotografa il passato. A machine that photographs the past has been invented. The headline knew exactly which nerve to touch. People do not merely want to remember the past. They want to catch it in the act. They want proof with edges, ink, grain, contrast, something that can be held up to the light. A photograph has a peculiar authority even when photographs lie. They can be staged, reversed, cropped, miscaptioned, and misunderstood. Yet they arrive with the force of evidence. A witness can be doubted. A testimony can be challenged. A photograph says, "Look at me." The Chronovisor claim understood the power of an image. The magazine article did more than describe Ernetti's claim. It helped give the case its most famous artifact, a grainy, high-contrast face of Christ, printed like evidence rather than devotion. In later retellings, that face becomes the visual center of the case. The machine had not produced only private testimony or strange technical language. It had given the world something to stare at. Once the face existed in print, the mood changed. Before the image, the Chronovisor could live somewhere between rumor, confession, and impossible invention. Afterward, readers had an object to cut out, save, doubt, or pass across the table. Was this Jesus as seen by a forbidden machine? Was it devotional art folded into a modern mystery? Was it a hoax, a mistake, a symbol, or something harder to name? The photograph narrowed attention and widened belief at the same time. People could stop picturing the machine and start staring at the result, eyes lifted, mouth open, the face already familiar from churches and prayer cards. Ernetti reportedly claimed more than one sacred viewing. The Last Supper appears in some accounts. The Crucifixion becomes the core revelation. The Chronovisor is no longer peering only into politics or antiquity. It is brushing against the central drama of Christianity. The stakes were no longer mechanical. If the machine was real, it could verify Scripture. It could also complicate Scripture, because a device capable of watching the crucifixion would not have to stop at the moments believers wanted confirmed. It could watch the trial, the private conversations, the decisions made away from crowds, the bodies in rooms where no witness was meant to survive. From there, the Vatican suppression element almost writes itself. Supportive accounts say the machine was eventually dismantled or hidden because it was too dangerous. Some place it under Vatican control. Others suggest church authorities feared what would happen if humanity gained access to any private act in history. As fiction, the idea has a grim intelligence. A device that sees the past would end more than future privacy. It would end past privacy. Every confession behind a closed door, every crime without a witness, every political bargain, every betrayal, every family myth, every sacred scene could be dragged back into view. Such a machine would not simply reveal history. It would turn all human life into surveillance after the fact. The legend answers the obvious question before the skeptic can finish asking it. Where is the machine? Hidden. Because it had to be. Emotionally, the answer works. As evidence, it is weak. Mysteries rarely survive on evidence alone. They survive when the missing evidence becomes part of the machinery of belief.
Vatican legends live on that pressure point. A locked door can be just a locked door. But if you already suspect something is behind it, the lock starts to feel like a clue. With the Chronovisor, the missing machine becomes almost as important as the machine itself. Maybe it vanished because it never existed. Or maybe, if you're inclined to believe, somebody looked at what it could do and decided the world was better off without it. I understand the pull of that. I also distrust how neatly it protects itself.
The crucifixion keeps the legend alive, but another piece of the case may be more revealing. Ernetti also claimed the machine recovered an ancient text, not a blurred image this time, but words on a page. Popular retellings often blur the details, sometimes making it sound as if the Chronovisor retrieved the lost Greek play from the deep past. The stronger skeptical trail points more specifically to a version of Thyestes by the Roman poet Quintus Ennius. The distinction moves the mystery out of the glow of the screen and into language. A photograph can be argued over visually. A text can be weighed line by line, word by word, syllable by syllable. If the Chronovisor had recovered a lost ancient drama, the discovery would have been staggering. It would have given scholars something more solid than a miracle story. Ancient literature survives through fragments, quotations, damaged manuscripts, references by later writers, and accidents of preservation. A lost work returning intact would land like thunder in classical studies. It would also create a test. The vocabulary could be dated. The meter could be examined. Known fragments could be laid beside the newly recovered passage, like shards of pottery on a scholar's desk. The text would carry its own fingerprints. In the most generous reading, the machine was restoring more than sacred history. It was returning human culture from the grave. A vanished voice from antiquity had come through the screen. Then skeptics looked closer. One problem, reported in later skeptical analysis, was the texture of the passage itself. A text supposedly rescued from the unreachable past appeared to contain an improbably high number of already known surviving fragments, the same kind of fragments a modern compiler would have within reach. Coincidence can never be ruled out completely. Still, it raises the wrong kind of eyebrow. If someone were trying to construct a lost ancient text, the easiest raw material would be the fragments already on the table. Another problem sat inside the Latin. Massimo Polidoro, writing in Skeptical Inquirer, reported that the classicist Catherine Eldred identified words in the alleged text that did not belong to Ennius's period. Philology is quiet work. No locked vault. No Vatican whisper. No machine humming in a darkened room. Just a word choice, a phrase, a usage pointing to the wrong century. Language carries time inside it. A single word can betray an author. A phrase can reveal that a writer is living after a development he was not supposed to know. A recovered ancient text has to sound like the world it came from. If it sounds like a later construction, one of the Chronovisor's strongest possible artifacts begins to collapse. The crucifixion image carries emotional force. The recovered text carries scholarly risk. When the text wobbles, the machine begins to look less like a hidden breakthrough and more like an assembly of available pieces. A face from devotional art, a lost play stitched from known fragments, famous scientists borrowed from public mythology, and a Vatican setting already heavy with mystery. None of those pieces alone proves fabrication. Together, they dirty the signal. From a distance, the chronovisor glows. Up close, the picture starts to break apart. Every durable mystery needs somewhere to put the locked box. For the Chronovisor, the box goes inside the Vatican. Not necessarily the actual Vatican of departments, archives, bureaucracy, correspondence, committees, and human limits. The imagined Vatican does the work here. Ancient walls, sealed rooms, archive boxes, cassocks and long corridors, Latin documents, and doors that seem to have been closed for centuries. Few settings on Earth carry more narrative weight. Empires have fallen around it. Languages have shifted around it. Governments have risen, murdered, collapsed, and been replaced. The institution remains, old enough to make almost any secret feel plausible. A machine that can see the past fits too easily in that setting. Supportive accounts lean hard into that atmosphere. The device was too dangerous. Pope Pius XII, in some tellings, forbade disclosure. The machine threatened human freedom. It could expose secrets no person had the right to uncover. So it was hidden. The move is elegant. Absence becomes responsibility. The machine is not missing because it failed to exist. It is missing because men with power understood what it could do. And if the machine were real, the ethical problem would be enormous. Imagine a world where death no longer seals an event, a private sin, an act of courage, a betrayal, an intimate grief, a political meeting, a confession whispered in a room. All of it could later be watched by strangers with enough access and curiosity. History would become evidence. Evidence would become power. Power would decide which parts of the past ordinary people were allowed to see. A chronovisor would not automatically make humanity freer. It might make humanity permanently searchable. The most unsettling idea here is simple. Total knowledge is not the same thing as wisdom. But an unsettling idea is not documentation. The Vatican setting plays tricks on the mind. The Church has archives, so perhaps the file is there. The Vatican has secrets, so perhaps this machine is one of them. Powerful institutions hide things, so perhaps the missing hardware proves the cover-up. Those thoughts have a natural momentum. They still are not proof. The honest version is harder to sit with. The Vatican has hidden things. Powerful institutions do protect themselves. None of that establishes a working device capable of watching Jesus die. Inside the Chronovisor legend, the Vatican becomes a sealed chamber in the imagination. It lets the mystery survive the failure of evidence, because if the machine cannot be found, a believer can always place it exactly where such a machine would be. Behind a door we are not allowed to open.
What I keep wondering is what people are really asking the Vatican to hold here. Is it truth? Or is it a final authority that agrees with the version of history they already want? A hidden machine can become almost anything. A miracle, a threat, a cover-up, even a kind of proof that proof is being withheld. Once a claim reaches that point, testing it gets slippery because every missing piece can be turned around and made to look intentional.
The first crack is plain enough. No chronovisor has ever been produced. No working device. No surviving technical manual that settles the question. No set of plans that allows independent researchers to reconstruct it. No component pulled from a laboratory drawer with a chain of custody. No verified member of the alleged scientific team leaving behind a clear record that says, yes, I worked on this machine. The case has testimony, retellings, books, magazine pieces, and artifacts whose origins grow more troubling under pressure. A claim this large needs more than atmosphere. Fermi presents one of the hardest problems. He died in 1954, which leaves any alleged collaboration a narrow and early window. It would place the supposed work during a period when his life was already heavily documented, and his movements were not those of an invisible man, free to disappear into a secret Vatican-adjacent laboratory. Von Braun brings a related problem. After the war, his career moved through American military and space institutions. He was watched, used, celebrated, criticized, documented. A secret side project involving a device that could view all human history would leave a strange kind of silence around it. Then the physics has to be faced. The Chronovisor depends on a beautiful premise. Light and sound from the past are still out there, waiting to be gathered. Beauty is not a mechanism. Sound does not travel through centuries as a clean, recoverable track. Light from an event scatters, reflects, weakens, and races outward. The idea that a device on Earth could tune into old light and sound from a specific ancient moment, then reconstruct a stable audiovisual scene, is not supported by known physics. As metaphor, it is haunting. As myth, it is powerful. As an instrument, it needs more than poetic residue. The photograph creates another fracture. The alleged image of Christ, the face that gave the public something to stare at, has long been one of the weakest parts of the case. Skeptical accounts report that it appears to match a reverse devotional image connected to a sculpture or postcard from Colle Valenza, associated with the Santuario dell'Amore Misericordioso, the kind of printed holy image that could pass from hand to hand long before anyone called it a transmission from Calvary. The ordinary nature of the match is what hurts. Not a forged Vatican diagram, not a stolen blueprint, not a coded memo from an archive. A devotional image, a prayer card face, something that could circulate, be copied, reversed, reproduced, and eventually reappear inside a miracle claim. The picture that was supposed to open a window onto Calvary seems to point instead toward modern religious art. The Thyestes text creates the same unease in another form, too much resemblance to what was already known, words that did not seem to belong to the right period, a miracle of recovery that looks uncomfortably like construction. The cracks do not arrive in one dramatic collapse. They pile up. No machine, no records from the famous collaborators, no plausible physics, a suspect photograph, a suspect text, a weak chain around later confession and recantation stories. The legend does not disappear under that weight. Legends rarely disappear just because the paperwork turns ugly. By now, though, the question has shifted. Not, where is the hidden machine? But, why did this claim feel necessary? The Chronovisor almost certainly never showed Father Ernetti the crucifixion. The answer is not romantic. No locked vault ending. No final shot of a forbidden machine sleeping under Rome. It does fit the surviving evidence. Stopping there would make the legend smaller than it is. Bad evidence can still reveal a real hunger. The Chronovisor emerged from a century that had learned to trust machines with reality. Machines split the atom, carried voices over oceans, launched men above the atmosphere, turned war into radar screens and coded signals, and made invisible forces visible. Proof changed shape. A sacred account in a book could feel ancient and powerful. Put it on a screen, and it would feel modern. It would speak in the language of the age. The Chronovisor promised a way to remove doubt by turning faith into footage. It promised a past that could stop arguing and finally confess. In that sense, the Chronovisor is a very 20th century religious legend. It does not reject science. It borrows the lab coat. It does not ask people to abandon screens. It puts Christ on one. The legend keeps returning because the desire underneath it is still alive. Everyone has a moment they would tune into if the universe allowed it. A family secret, a lost parent's final hour, a political assassination, a sacred event, a war crime, a vanished civilization. One sentence someone swears they never said. A world where nothing is lost sounds merciful at first. Then, it starts to sound unbearable. Maybe Ernetti understood that tension. Maybe he believed more than he invented. Maybe he invented more than he admitted. Maybe the claim grew around him until even the people carrying it could no longer separate confession from rumor, memory from longing, fraud from faith. The machine is gone because there was almost certainly no machine to preserve. The screen remains. Not in a Vatican vault. In the modern imagination, a flickering rectangle in a darkened room, a priest leaning forward, a small group of men holding their breath, and the past appearing just long enough to be believed before dissolving beyond proof.
For me, the Chronovisor does not end with the Vatican hiding a machine or science secretly conquering time. It lands somewhere more human and maybe a little sadder. We want a witness that cannot die. We want proof that cannot be argued with. We want history to replay the moment just once and settle the matter. But history almost never gives us that.
History leaves fragments. A magazine article, a priest's claim, a famous name with no paper trail, a photograph that looks too familiar, a lost play that sounds too modern. Behind all of it, the old ache remains. If only we could see it. If only we could go back. If only the dead had left a signal strong enough for us to find. The Chronovisor was supposed to be a window into yesterday. It became a mirror. And what it shows is not the crucifixion, or Cicero, or a hidden room inside the Vatican. It shows us staring into the dark, waiting for the past to answer.